and welcome to all our participants. I can see we have 25 participants. So welcome to the WiN for Peace webinar on nuclear export control. And the reason why we are late is that we have very active ladies in WiN Global, and we had another parallel session of women in nuclear in innovation. And they just finished, and unfortunately, the Zoom account that we have does not support 2 parallel sessions. So thank you very much for your patience, and welcome to this session. I hope you will find it interesting and informative. And we have 3 speakers today. I'm the first one. I will give you an overview about what is nuclear export controls and why we need it. Then we have Agostina Serrano Bentancur of the Argentinian nuclear regulator, who will speak about the nuclear suppliers guidelines. What are the NSG guidelines? Why are they in place? How did they come to be? And what is the importance for us? And last not least, we will have my former colleague, my dear colleague, Mariam Al-Sehaimi from the UAE, from Abu Dhabi, who will talk to us about nuclear export controls, how it is carried out at the national level in the UAE. So without further ado, let me share my presentation with you. Okay. So I hope you can all see it. So this is actually our 4th webinar from the WiN for Peace group, Nuclear Export Control Basics, What and Why. And before we go into the subject, let me first tell you who we are. So we are the WiN Global Group of Expertise, Women in Nuclear for Peace. We currently have 16 members. I'm leading this group. And we have 2 supporters. One is the Vienna Center for Disarmament and Non-Proliferation, the VCDNP in Vienna. And the other one is the UN Office for Disarmament Affairs, UNODA, also based in Vienna, Austria. Our objectives are to promote activities, training and collaboration in the areas of nuclear non-proliferation, safeguards, export controls and nuclear disarmament. And actually the ultimate objective is to increase the number of female professionals who are either interested in these fields or eventually may be interested in working in these important fields. So what do we do? First of all, we promote the exclusively peaceful use of nuclear energy. And we do this by conducting regular meetings and events to discuss relevant current topics. We also conduct educational and training sessions for WiN Global members. And these are usually, so far, have been in virtual format, but of course they can also be hybrid or physical depending on the occasion. And we cooperate with different bodies such as the IAEA or the UNODA, VCDNP I've already mentioned. We recently concluded a partnership agreement with the Institute for Nuclear Materials Management. So we cooperate with them as well. And our intention is to work together also with the Atomic Reporters, then the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, ICAN, etc. Our events are open to all WiN Global members and beyond. So some of you may not yet be WiN Global members, and I strongly encourage you to seek out your local chapters, because there are chapters in many countries in this world. You just need to go to the WiN Global website and see whether your country is represented in WiN Global. So we encourage you to join those chapters, and by joining them, you will become a member of WiN Global. And if there is no chapter and you want to be involved in establishing a chapter, let us know as well. So, so far, as I mentioned at the beginning, we have done 3 webinars. We had an inauguration ceremony at the end of February, where we also talked about the foundations of the international non-proliferation regime. At the end of March, we talked about safeguards basics and about the implementation of safeguards both at the international level by the IAEA, at the regional level by ABAC and Euratom, and at the national level by the ARN, the Argentinian regulatory body. About a month ago, we spoke about Iran's nuclear program and why it is of proliferation concern. And as I mentioned today, we will speak about nuclear export control basics. What are they and why do we need them? In about a month, at the beginning of August, we will have a very famous speaker, Mr. David Albright, to talk to us about the AQH network. And we are just fixing the date now. So it will be sometimes at the beginning of August. And after the NPT preparatory conference in July, August, we will have a session on disarmament about the basic concepts and the current status, what it is. Later on in October, we will have a session with the VCDMP on what the VCDMP is doing and how it is of benefit to you. And also we will have a speaker talking about the AUKUS initiative. You may have heard about it, the transfer of nuclear submarines from the US and UK to Australia. And we have some unscheduled things in the pipeline as well. For example, the TPNW, ICANN, SMRs, etc. So without further ado, let's start. What are nuclear export controls? As I said, I will give you an overview, first of all, then we will let Agostina talk about the Nuclear Suppliers Group, and last not least, Mariam Al-Sehalmi about the implementation of nuclear export controls at the national level using the UAE as an example. So, overview of nuclear export control regime. Actually, nuclear export controls are enshrined in the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty of 1970, this treaty is published by the IAEA as INTCIRC 140. So the IAEA publishes important information on its website as information circulars, but it doesn't mean that the IAEA has much to do with the information, always much to do with the information it publishes. In this case, it administers, it's in charge of the safeguards that are foreseen in the NPT, but I will tell you later where, for example, in the NSG guidelines and in the Sangha committee guidelines, the IAEA is not involved, it's just publishing the information circulars. So if we read Article 3.2 of the NPT, it says, each state party to the treaty undertakes not to provide A, source or special fissionable material, or B, equipment or material especially designed or prepared for the processing, use, or production of special fissionable material to any non-nuclear weapon state, unless the source of special fissionable material shall be subject to the safeguards required by this article, so that is IAEA safeguards. So it means states can only provide, that means a transfer, especially designed or prepared equipment to other states if the material that is produced or processed by that equipment is subject to IAEA safeguards. So you may ask yourself, what is the meaning of especially designed or prepared? And you are not the only one, because when the NPT was drafted, the drafters put this terminology into the treaty without defining it exactly. So a gentleman called Sanger, a Swiss guy, formed a committee to define what is understood by especially designed or prepared. And in 1974, the Sanger committee came up with the first list, the so-called trigger list, so triggering IAEA safeguards, and the IAEA publishes this as INTCIRC 209. So as I said, in this case, the IAEA just publishes the information without actually being involved in the implementation of the Sangha committee list, except by applying safeguards. So what happened next? Actually, nuclear export controls was the improvements were triggered by events that happened in the world. So in 1974, India conducted a so-called peaceful nuclear explosion, the Smiling Buddha, which at that time was actually allowed under the NPT, but they were using nuclear material that had been provided to them by Canada in a reactor for only peaceful purposes. And it was actually an eye-opener for the major nuclear suppliers because they saw how easy it was to use the material in a reactor to build an explosive device. So all those major suppliers then came together and formed the so-called Nuclear Suppliers Group, the NSG. And they also published a trigger list. The first list was published in 1974 as INTCIRC 254, distributed by the IAEA on its website. It now consists of two parts, but when it was first published, it was only one part, and it was the so-called also trigger list. And at the beginning, it was a bit difficult from the Sangha committee trigger list, but now those two lists are practically identical. So what happened next? In 1991, it became known that Iraq was developing nuclear weapons using both the uranium and the plutonium route. So here you can see some of my former colleagues with seized aluminum tubes, which were used for the construction of centrifuges. And here the NSG came to realize, okay, it's not only items that can be directly used for nuclear, for the production of for nuclear applications that are relevant, but they are also the so-called dual-use items. So items which can be both used for civilian purposes and for military purposes. So they created the so-called Part 2 list, the dual-use list, which contains a lot of materials, a lot of equipment, which you will find in daily applications such as certain valves or mass spectrometers or CNC machines, etc., etc. But if they have certain specifications, they are controlled by the NSG. This is the Part 2 list of the NSG. And what happened next? So at the end of 2003, it became known that Libya was also pursuing a nuclear weapons program based on the uranium route. So they had imported centrifuge parts and components from A.Q. Khan and his nuclear network, which was exposed a little bit later. And they were trying to build a nuclear weapon based on highly enriched uranium. This is a picture of A.Q. Khan where he shows how to detonate the nuclear weapon. You may have seen this. So this exposure of Libya's nuclear weapons program and the A.Q. Khan network led to UN Security Council Resolution 1540, in addition to the 9/11 events. So the UN Security Council Resolution 1540 is directed towards the so-called non-state actors. So actors that are not necessarily acting on behalf of the state, but this can be terrorist groups. And the UN Security Council resolution has several provisions. It affirms that the proliferation of nuclear, chemical, and biological weapons, so you can see not only nuclear, but also chemical, biological, and the means of delivery, this constitutes a threat to international peace and security. And very important, UN Security Council Resolution 1540 obliges all states to refrain from supporting by any means non-state actors from developing, acquiring, manufacturing, etc., nuclear, chemical, or biological weapons and their means of delivery. And it imposes binding obligations on all states to adopt legislation to prevent such proliferation and to establish the appropriate domestic controls. So this UN Security Council Resolution 1540 is really important because it establishes the requirement to have national nuclear export controls. And when we have this session on EQ Khan in early August, you will see why why the EQ Khan network could work the way it was, because there was just a lack of nuclear export controls at that time worldwide. So in summary, why do we need nuclear export controls? So first of all, it's a requirement, as I've just said, for all states based on that UN Security Council Resolution 1540. And it is a prerequisite for any international transfer of nuclear material, of certain non-nuclear materials, so that's nuclear-grade graphite and heavy water, especially designed of prepared equipment and technology, and certain dual-use equipment. So this includes trigger list items such as reactors or reactor components, conversion plants, fuel fabrication plants, uranium enrichment plants, reprocessing plants, etc. It includes heavy water nuclear-grade graphite. And part 2 of the NSG guidelines includes nuclear-related dual-use items. I have mentioned CNC machines, certain valves, composites, etc., etc. And it does not just include control on the actual physical items, but also controls of on the transfer of relevant technologies, software, drawings, etc., and also the training. So it's the so-called intangible transfer of technology. So the nuclear suppliers guidelines establish several requirements for international transfers. So in case we have any participants from newcomer countries, you need to be aware that you cannot just buy a new reactor on the open market. You have to have nuclear export controls in place. So let me finish at this stage and hand over to the WiN for Peace member, Agostina Serrano de Betancourt. She works for the Argentinian nuclear regulatory body, and she's a very active member of WiN for Peace. She has presented several times, and she's also working in the background on organizing these webinars together with her colleague Florencia. So thank you very much, Agostina, and I give the floor to you to speak to us about the NSG.
Thank you, Eva. Just one moment. There it is. So thank you, Eva, for the introduction. I'm going to give you a brief on the Nuclear Suppliers Group, the NSG, and my presentation is based on the information you can find on their website. And well, the NSG is a group of nuclear suppliers countries that seeks to contribute to the non-proliferation of nuclear weapons through the implementation of 2 sets of guidelines, as Eva mentioned, for the nuclear export and nuclear-related export. It is important to notice that the NSG is a voluntary, non-legally binding association of major suppliers' governments, and that it was not created by a treaty. There are currently 48 participating governments, and the European Commission and chair of the Sangir Committee participate as observers. I'm not going to stop at its origins because I've already talked about it, but it's important to recall that the NSG, known originally as the London Club, convened a series of meetings to facilitate a consistent interpretation of the obligations arising from the Article 3.2 of the NPT, following the explosion in 1974 of a nuclear device by a non-nuclear weapon state, an event which demonstrated that nuclear technology transfer for peaceful purposes could be misused. The NSG guidelines are a set of conditions of supply that are applied to nuclear transfer for peaceful purposes to help ensure that such transfers will not be diverted to unsafeguarded nuclear fuel cycle or nuclear explosive activities. The NSG guidelines set for conditions of supply to establish a baseline of responsible and safe supply behavior among suppliers. NSG participants commit to implement the guidelines on a national basis. The guidelines are supplemented by 2 control lists, also called technical annexes, the trigger list annex to the Part 1 guidelines, and the dual use list annexed to the Part 2 guidelines. A control list is a list of sensitive items that are subject to export control by national authorities. The first NSG guidelines were published in 1978 by the IAEA as an information circular, the 254, to apply for nuclear transfers to non-nuclear weapon states to help ensure that such transfers will not be diverted to non-peaceful purposes. And in 1992, the NSG adopted the Part 2 guidelines. The NSG Part 2 guidelines were created by NSG participants after it became apparent that export control provisions then in force had not prevented one state party to the NPT from pursuing a clandestine nuclear weapon program, as Eva mentioned. So we have the NSG guidelines. We have the Part 1 that govern the export of items that are specially designed or prepared for nuclear use. This is very important. This includes nuclear material, nuclear reactors and equipment prepared for non-nuclear materials for reactors, plants and equipment for the reprocessing, enrichment and conversion of nuclear material, and for fuel fabrication and heavy water production, and technology, including software, associated with each of the above-mentioned items. These items are known as trigger list items, as they transfer trigger a requirement for IAEA safeguards in the country of destination. Then we have the NSG Part 2 guidelines that govern the export of nuclear-related dual-use items and technology, that is, items that can make a major contribution to an safeguarded nuclear fuel cycle or nuclear explosive activities, but that have also non-nuclear uses, for example, in industry. These items are known as dual-use items. The Part 2 is the definitive list in which entries for the controls are described with a degree of technical detail and narrowly worded to cover only those items that are significant and controllable. The NSG reviews the Part 1 and Part 2 guidelines under technical annexes, but what is the rationale for adding items to both lists? Well, the guiding question for adding items to a trigger list is, do these items meet the specially designed or prepared criteria for the processing, use, production of special fissionable material? The EDP, as we mentioned, the special designing or prepared criteria, originates also from the Article 3.2 of the NPT. In the case of Part 2, the guiding question which inform discussions are, have proliferator actually solved these items? Can the items be controlled? It is feasibly useful to control them. Discussions in order to set parameters will touch upon issues such as the proliferation risk associated to an item, its technical characteristics, and other applications it may have. The result of this discussion leads the NSG to decide whether it is feasible to set controls, whether controls will have a significant effect, and whether alternative technical paths should be also controlled. And I believe that an important question is, how does the NSG achieve these aims through the guidelines? Well, it's important to note that in Part 1 guidelines, formal government assurances are required between the exporting and importing governments to assure that the nuclear transfer is for peaceful purposes and will not contribute to the proliferation of nuclear weapons or other nuclear explosive devices. Also, the importing government has to provide assurance that it will not be retransferred, that it will not retransfer items, material, or technology that it has received to a third government without the exporting government's prior consent. And there is an additional requirement for physical protection measures and an agreement to exercise particular, caution in the transfer of sensitive facilities. And I think maybe at this point you may ask how the NSG guidelines are implemented in fact. While the guidelines are implemented by each participating government in accordance with its national law and practices. In harmonizing their national laws and domestic regulation with the NSG, participants are expected to act responsibly and practice restraint with regard to export of items that could contribute to the proliferation of nuclear weapons. In particular, decisions on export applications are taken at the national level, yes, in accordance with national export licensing requirements. This is the prerogative and right of all states that are party to the NPT for all export decisions in any field of commercial activity, and is also in line with the text of the Article 3.2 of the NPT, which refers to each state party, and thus emphasizes the sovereign obligation of any party to the treaty to exercise proper export controls. It is also important to mention that NSG guidelines introduce a degree of order and predictability among countries who are suppliers of licensed items, and harmonize standards and interpretation of suppliers' undertakings with the aim, of course, of ensuring that the normal process of commercial competition does not lead to outcomes that further the proliferation of nuclear weapons. And now I will refer briefly to the structure of the NSG and how it works. Well, the NSG works on the basis of consensus. Overall responsibility of activities lies within NSG plenary meetings. The NSG plenary can decide, for example, to set up technical working groups on matters such as the review of the guidelines, the annexes, the procedural arrangement, information sharing, transparency activities, and also outreach activities. In addition to the plenary meeting, the NSG has two other standing bodies that report to the plenary. These are the consultative group, the CG, and the information exchange meeting, the IEM. The CG is tasked to hold consultations on issues associated with the guidelines on nuclear supply and its technical annexes. And the IEM presides the NSG plenary during the plenary week, and provides another opportunity for NSG participating governments to share information and developments of relevance to the objectives and content of the NSG guidelines. Also under the IEM, the LIM discusses issues relating to the effective licensing and enforcement practices. And then we have the TEC that could be tasked at the request of the CG with ensuring that the NSG control lists are complete and up to date with technical advancements. Also is not there, but the permanent mission of Japan to the international organizations in Vienna acts as point of contact of the NSG. And let me say how it works. Well, the NSG participants exchange information in writing on an international basis and report regularly to the CG, the IEM, and the plenary. Information exchange includes notification of export denials that have been issued as a result of national decisions not to authorize transfers of dual-use equipment or technology, for example. And this information exchange ensures that the NSG participants do not approve transfers of such items without first consulting with the government that issued the notification. And we have an NSG chair. Yes, it rotates on an ad hoc basis, usually annually, and has overall responsibility for coordination of work and outreach activities. Any participant is free to indicate its interest to chair the NSG, and a decision is then reached by consensus. The Troika is an informal arrangement composed of the past, the current, and the future NSG chairs that contributes to outreach activity and to continuity. The current chair is Argentina, the previous is Poland, and the future is Brazil. So this is our current Troika. And how often they met? Well, the plenary meeting, the IEM, and the LIM are convened once a year. The TEC meets twice a year, and the CG meets 3 times a year. There can be also exceptional meetings, both formal or informal. Argentina holds the current presidency of the NSG, and we host a plenary week in Buenos Aires very soon, from July 10 to 14. And for those who are going to participate, I hope you are very well received and welcome in my country. And the last question I choose from the NSG website seems to me that summarizes the group's contribution to the international non-proliferation regime. The NSG guidelines are consistent with and complement the various internationally legally binding instruments in the field of nuclear non-proliferation. The NSG seeks to strengthen the non-proliferation regime with the NPT as its legal foundation through implementing calls on the state parties by successive NPT review conference, and I quote, ensure that the export of nuclear-related use items to states not party to the treaty do not assist any nuclear weapons program, and to make use of multilateral and agreed guidelines and undertakings in developing their own national export controls. As we saw, there is also close interdependence between the controls in the NSG Part 1 guidelines and the effective implementation of IAEA safeguards. A fuel scope safeguards agreement with the IAEA is an NSG condition for the future supply of trigger list items to any non-nuclear weapon states. The NSG guidelines also contain the so-called non-proliferation principle adopted in 1994, where the transfer, notwithstanding other provisions in the NSG guidelines, is only authorized when the exporting country has been satisfied that the transfer would not contribute to the proliferation of nuclear weapons. The non-proliferation principle seeks to cover the rare but important cases where adherence to the NPT or to a nuclear weapon-free zone treaty may not be itself a guarantee that a state party will consistently share the objectives of the treaty, or that it will remain in compliance with its treaty obligations. And to conclude, I would like to highlight that the NSG establishes rigorous conditions of supply for nuclear and nuclear-related dual exports in the context of further developments of the application of nuclear energy for peaceful purposes, and that NSG participating governments and governments that choose to adhere to the guidelines commit to uphold these high non-proliferation standards for transfer. And of course, adherence to the NSG guidelines is a visible commitment by a government to a common international effort to implementing the international standard for responsible non-proliferation and supplier behavior. So, if you want to read more detailed information about the NSG, you can access through this code to the document entitled The Nuclear Suppliers Group, its guidelines, origins, structures, and role. And there is also a very comprehensive 5-minute video on the NSG summarizing the information I just shared with you. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Agostina. That was very informative. Thank you. Actually, I have a couple of questions, but I'm sure the audience has it as well. So let's leave that until the end of the session. And by the way, ladies and gentlemen, our participants, we will also have a short question and answer session where we will ask you questions, and we will have like a voting where you can answer with yes or no. So I should have mentioned that at the beginning, but better late than never. So let's move now to the national level implementation nuclear export controls. And it's a great pleasure for me to welcome my former colleague, Mariam Al-Sehaimi. Until 3 months ago, we were sitting next to each other in Fanner's office, and I miss her a lot, and it's really great to see her face today. And I'm happy that she volunteered to give this presentation to us, because the UAE really made a lot of progress in nuclear export controls ever since Fanner was established in 2011. Was it 11, Mariam? I think 11. Anyway, without further ado, let me hand over to Mariam. Mariam, please go ahead. But oh, sorry, I forgot to tell you all that Mariam is a very knowledgeable nuclear professional working in the nuclear export control section of FANR, which is located in the safeguards department of the UAE's nuclear regulator, and she's one of the most experienced staff members there. So Mariam, please go ahead. Okay, I think you need to, Mariam, you need to unmute yourself. I think you're muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, perfect. Thank you.
Okay. So I should share my screen then.
Yes, please.
Okay.
At the bottom, you can see share screen. Okay, perfect. Thank you. We can see it.
Okay, great. So thank you for the introduction, Eva, and I really miss you here, and your place is empty here. Yeah. And thank you for inviting me to present here in this webinar. It's really a great opportunity for me. So just to introduce myself, my name is Mariam Sahami. I work in Federal Authority for Nuclear Regulation, which is the regulatory body in UAE. I work as an import-export specialist. So my presentation today will be about UAE nuclear export control system. We'll talk about the challenges in our country and also about the system in general. We'll talk about the national and international cooperation that we established, our electronic system, the update of Regulation 9, which is regulation of export control, final inspection. Also, we have remaining challenges and also the recommendation how to overcome these challenges. So UAE is located in between East and West. So it was used till now as a commercial gateway between the East and West. So we have large number of ports, land ports, seaports, and airports. Two of them are top 50, sorry, in container ports, which is located in Dubai. And most of the cargoes to the GCC region pass by UAE. We have UAE consists of 7 states. Each state have different custom system. So this is make it also a bit challenging for us. We have also a large number of free zones and special zones in UAE. In any countries that they have export control system, they should have some legislations in international wise and in national wise as well. So in international wise, we have in place the NPT, we have the CSA, we have the additional protocol, and the United Nations Security Council Resolution 1540. We have also we are following the nuclear supplier group, part 1 and part 2. So we are using the list to control the items. In national wise, we in UAE established or issued the policy in 2008, which is talking about the potential development of peaceful nuclear energy. FANR, which is the regulatory body of UAE, was established by the federal law number 6 of 2009, which is to oversee the nuclear sector in UAE. UAE in in 2022 declared that it will adhere to energy guidelines, part 1 and part 2. So we are incorporating it in our also regulations. We have 2 regulations: regulation for import and export of nuclear material, nuclear-related items, and nuclear-related dual-use items. So even the energy is reflected in our title of the regulation. The second regulation is for system of accountancy and control, where we are accounting for the nuclear material in the country. Another aspect of the nuclear export control system UAE is the national and international cooperations. So we have a good cooperation with the agencies in UAE, such as the Federal Customs Authority. We have lots of information exchange between us. And also with border security, we have established an advanced cargo information system where they forward us some information about suspicious shipments. Also, FANAR gives quarterly training to the custom officers, as they are the first line that they receive the items, so at least they will know how the commodity and can identify the commodity. JAVSA's licensing system is the free zone in Dubai, where we have an access to their system, so we can see if there is some suspicious items or suspicious companies. In national and international wise, we have several nuclear cooperation agreements with different countries where we can exchange information. And also we have a memorandum of understanding and intent with different agencies in other countries. The third one, we have working mechanism between the regulators with different countries. So also it's to ease the information exchange between each other. For our regulation, which is Regulation 9, which is called Regulation Import and Export of Nuclear Material, Nuclear-related items, and nuclear-related dual-use items, we have issued the first one in 2015. And after 6 years of implementation, we revised it, taking into account the lessons learned in implementing it. Also, we took our licensees' feedbacks and also the new practices that is used in the export control regimes or other countries also best practices. So the major change in our regulation was we simplified our notifications. So the licensee will notify us much less than before. And also we introduced the approval, so we can track the shipments once it's going out or coming in our country. We introduced also the internal compliance program, where it was introduced before, but was a little bit general, but now with detailed information to the licensees and the both parties. The main change was introducing the catch-all clause, which allow us to control the non-listed items based on the end user verification. This was a gap we filled with this revision. Going to the electronic system, we have an electronic system which is called the New Tech Portal, where we use it to monitor the shipments coming and going out of the country. This system is depending on HS code. We share the HS code with the customs, so they put it in their risk engine once any company use this HS code, they will refer them to us or to our system, so they can apply. Then we will have a technical review to this shipment documents and technical specification of the item. After that, we will decide to give them approval or to do more further investigations. So new tech portal, we have integration with the customs. It has also watch list flagging, where we embedded in the new tech portal the watch lists from different countries. So any company using this system and they are reported in one of the entity list, it will give us a flag. Also, we have a collaboration with the central bank, where all the users of the new tech portal, they should put their banking accounts and IBAN number, so if they will verify if they are dealing with any money laundering or something like this. The border security, so we should hide this one. Also, we have borders, as I mentioned previously, that we have a cooperation with them. So they have a system, and their system is integrated with a new tech portal. So any information they found in their system, they will send it to our system, so we can have a review to it, and then we will give them a direction what to do next. There is also a US review page where US BIS, they have access to the system, and then they can check what we recommend for them to check, and also we can check what they put in the system. So we have the same understanding of what's happening. The smart approval, we give them to companies that using the system and having a controlled HS code, but not a controlled item. So, you know, the HS code is not for one item, so it's a broad one. So we give them a smart approval, so they can easily release their shipments without any delay. And we can also have a post review for them if necessary. We do several inspections, especially for Baraka, because it's our main licensee, and the only facility that we have in UAE. So we verify the imports, export, and re-export of the equipment, material, and also the technology that is related to the reactor project. We have another licenses as well, but mostly they are dealing with the dual-use items, such as CNC machines, ICP, MS-ICPs, mass spectrometers. So we verify also their activities, we verify their compliance with the regulation. We also inspect some companies, we call them the involved parties, where they transfer the items, but they are not licensees, but they are involved in transferring such controlled items. So we can inspect their store warehouses, where they keep the regulated items. And it's triggered by also information received from customs, from cooperation with other states as well. Saying that, we also end up with seizing several equipment which was transferred without final license, and they are all transferred to the court for the enforcement process. Even all of effort done, still have some challenges, as the amount of trade is very huge here in UAE. So it's need to act in a really fast way to cope with it. And also a large quantity of goods coming through transit and transshipment, and this is really urgent. It should be it should be reviewed and inspected very quickly. So, as I said, we use HS code to control the items, and HS code is not designed for export control. So we have a lot of noise, a lot of shipment which is not controlled, but we use it for now, and we have another also cooperation which helps us to identify other potential licensees or suspicious companies of shipments. As mentioned earlier, so we have a challenge in the custom centers, where each custom center, they have their own custom system where they establish it based on their needs. So integrating this customs system with our system is taking also a time to be done. Solution: we implemented some solutions to overcome these challenges. So we cooperate with competent authorities, integrating some of the customs system were integrated to our system, and we have a plan also to integrate all the states in UAE with our system. Also, customs staff is the first line of defense, so they need to have really good knowledge about the controlled items. So we regularly give them outreach or awareness sessions, training to identify the commodity. International and cooperations, which leads us to exchange more information about the transfer of the controlled items. We have also information sharing mechanism with several countries, where we are informed about some shipments are coming before it's arriving to the country. We have the information about it, and this might be used in wider basis with other also countries. We have with some countries, but in future we might have more countries. So to conclude, the nuclear export control regime is an ever-evolving field that constantly need to be adapted to evolving technological developments. And a prompt response by the nuclear export control community to a new challenge is essential to keep abreast of those challenges. Also, collaboration between national and international level is really crucial. Thank you for listening, and I hope it's an informative presentation.
Thank you very much, Mariam. This was really a great overview of how the UAE implements nuclear export controls at the national level. So I'm sure you will all have found it interesting. And before we move to the Q&A session, I suggest we pose our questions to you. So may I ask Florencia, could you just display the questions, or how do we do this now? Wait a sec. Give me a moment. Florencia?
Ivan, about a quiz question?
Yes.
The chat.
Okay. In the chat. Okay, so we have the Q&A, but I can't see the questions. Okay, here we are. So the first question is to all of you, and I'm sure you will find this rather easy. Are all states required to establish and implement nuclear export controls, yes or no? Please go ahead and press the button. 6 out of 25, 7. Okay. 10 out of 12. Go ahead. Please keep answering the question. I give you half a minute. There's no, we are not checking, it's all anonymous, so please feel free to answer the questions. Do all states need to establish and implement nuclear export controls, yes or no? So let us give you 10 more seconds. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Stop. Okay, so most of you had it right. So as I explained, based on UN Security Council Resolution 1540, which is obligatory for all states need to establish nuclear export controls. Of course, the implementation of this provision is not easy, and there is a group of experts of the UN Security Council 1540 committee, which helps states to put nuclear export controls in place. And some states are at a more progressive level, others are lagging behind, but yes, they are still required to establish a nuclear export control system in their country. So, and we have another question from Mariam. Florencia, can you bring that up? So the question, the second question is, okay, we had that one. So I end the poll. And the next one is, I close this one. And can you post it again, Florencia, the second question? Okay, so the question is, the NSG guidelines are implemented by each PG in accordance with its national laws and practices. True or false? That is the question on the second presentation. And also NSG guidelines are supplemented by control lists, also called technical annexes. Yes or not? True or false? So please go ahead. I'll give you a minute to answer. Ten more seconds. 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Stop. So, Agustina, would you like to comment on the answers?
Yes, of course. So the first one, the NSG guidelines are implemented by each PG in accordance with its national law and practices. That is true. Remember that it's not a treaty, it's not a legally binding obligation. The NSG, each government implement the guidelines by their national law. So the second one, NSG guidelines are supplemented by control lists, also called technical annexes. That is true. Remember that the guidelines have recommendations for the transfers, and the annexes has all the items listed. So each government is more easy to control. And there is no link between NSG guidelines and the effective implementation of IAEA safeguard. That is false. Remember that the trigger list has a requirement for a government that receives a nuclear transfer to implement IAEA safeguard. So there is an interdependence. Is not there is a link, okay, between the NSG and the IAEA safeguards.
Thank you, Agostina. And on the third question, I would like to add that the Annex 2 of the additional protocol corresponds to an old version of the trigger list. So definitely there is a connection between safeguards and export control. So so the third presentation, so the third question is by Mariam. Do all countries have similar nuclear control systems? Yes or no? Please go ahead. Ten more seconds. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 2, 3, 1. Stop. Okay. So, Mariam, would you like to comment on this?
Yes. So the question is, do all countries have similar nuclear control system? The answer is no, and most of you get it right. So each country will see what its requirements. So in UAE, we control import because we are a country which have more, it's an importing country. So we control import, we control transit and transshipment because this is what we have in our country. Other countries maybe only controlling the export because they are exporting country. This is one of the aspects.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mariam. So this is the end of the polls, and let me now open, first of all, a big thank you to Agostina and Mariam for your presentations. I hope you all found it as interesting as I did. And let's now look at the Q&A, what questions there are. One is by Bayan Ismail. What determines to supply a country with nuclear technology or not? Is signing treaties enough to let NSG supply the country with the technology to establish a nuclear power program? Okay, so
do you want me, Eva, to?
Yeah, you can answer, and I can also add something, but you start, Agostina.
Yeah, I will try to answer the two questions in one. So decisions on export, as I mentioned, are taken at the national level in accordance with national export licensing requirements. So in harmonizing their domestic regulation with NSG, participants are expected to act responsibly and practice restraint with regard to exports of items that could contribute to the proliferation of nuclear weapons. Saying that, there are different conditions of supply. For example, to be part of the NPT and of the Nuclear Weapon Free Zone Treaty, but not the only condition, okay? Maybe another conditions are non-explosive use assurances, and safeguards requirement, a retransfer provision that requires the receiving state to apply the same conditions when we're exporting these items. So the country makes the decision to make an effective export, but there are different conditions that it has to analyze, not only to be signatory of a treaty.
Yes, and let me just add to that, Agustina, also, as I said, you cannot obtain a reactor on the free market. There are all these conditions of supply, and one of them is, for example, the implementation of the energy guidelines by exchange of a government-to-government agreement where the exporting government requests the receiving government to commit to using the to be transferred items or material only for peaceful purposes. And there are several other provisions that the requirement for licensing those items, as Agustina mentioned, etc., etc. So it's really important to have this export control system to become knowledgeable, first of all these requirements. If you are from a newcomer country and want to import especially trigger list items, so you need to be really aware what are the requirements, and then to see how you can implement them at the national level. So this is what Mariam explained. It was a real long process to establish this system in the UAE, but now it's working very well, and I'm sure any newcomer country can follow suit by just getting more informed and more educated about nuclear export requirements. Okay, that was the only question. So thank you, Bayan Ismail, for this question. And somebody wants Mariam's email. Are there any more questions? If not, I would like to ask Agustina, so how does the NSG address the challenges of emerging technologies, like we have this additive manufacturing, artificial intelligence, machine learning, 3D printing? You know, somebody managed to print a nuclear fuel element with a 3D printer. So these are unprecedented challenges, to my mind, to nuclear export controls. So how is the NSG handling these emerging technologies? That's one question. And the second question is, how long does it actually take until a new technology item or a new technology is then included in the annexes? How fast does this happen, and how much review is required for that? So if you could answer this, Agustina, or at least give me some idea, I would appreciate. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for the question. I could give you some idea. Well, the NSG have the technical expert group, the TEG, that could be tasked with ensuring that NSG control lists are complete and up to date with technical advancements. So the CG could request the TEG to analyze new items. And in fact, it's what happens at the plenary weeks, and the TEGs meet twice a year. So they have the difficult task of reviewing the new technologies. And within the work of the CG and the plenary, the decision to review the control list. Every year, I think at least the last years, we have new lists, reviewing lists. I mean, new items are included and are decided at the plenary week. But the CG works, they meet 3 times a year, and they work on the revision of the control lists. So it's a common work between the TEG, the CG, and the plenary, of course, but because, as I mentioned, all the decisions are taken by consensus from the participating governments.
Thank you, Agustina. I can also imagine it will be a challenge to weigh how much control can you implement, because some of these things are just so available everywhere. So anybody can actually buy them on the open market. And where do you start your control, and how realistic is it to control some of these emerging technologies? Like a 3D printer, it can really do amazing things. and they are becoming more and more sophisticated, and I think that's really a challenge for the future, how to control such equipment, such new equipment.
Yeah, and I think that the dual-use items are most difficult to decide. That's why I mentioned the rationale behind the decision of adding new items. So in the case of part 2, we ask how proliferators actually solve these items. Can this item be controlled? They are useful to control them because there are a lot of dual-use items and can be included in the list, but NSG participant government had to ask this question if it's useful to include or not.
I will put a link. Wait a second. This is already done. I would like to put a link for the 2 lists in the Q&A. Okay, I don't know whether I can do that as a panelist. It doesn't seem so. Who has the trick? Who knows? Okay, Bayan Ismail, it is Bayan, the one who wants Mariam's email. I'm a nuclear engineer who is now a resident of the UAE, and I wish to work or have an internship at Funder. So I wish. Okay, so I suggest you connect with Miss Mariam. I don't know how many interns they have at Funder, but one never knows. So good luck.
So she can email me, and I will check for her. No problem.
Otherwise, I cannot put anything in the chat, in the Q&A.
I put the link from the guidelines, and I don't know if everyone can see.
Yeah. So if you want to familiarize yourself, you will with the 2. Oh, here I can see it. Yeah, here's the chat. So that's the guidelines. That's part 1 and part 2, Agustina.
Yes, there you have the link from both lists. And as I mentioned, the Nuclear Suppliers Group website is very complete. You have a lot of information there. You have a video, you have a lot of documents. So if you are interested, you can download the documents from there.
Thank you, Agustina. So I suggest if you are interested, familiarize yourself. Look at those annexes. They are really very comprehensive. And it's really a technical challenge, especially for the dual-use items, to determine whether they are controlled or not. You have to go through all the technical specifications like my former colleagues do in the UAE for thousands of items every day. So it's really a challenge, especially for a country like the UAE with all these transactions on a daily basis. Wait, there's another question. Okay, good. So I can see Natalia, she can see the list. So are there any more questions which you have to any one of us from the audience, from the participants? If not, I would like to inform you also that we will have a survey to see which topics will be of interest to you in addition to the ones that I presented at the beginning of the webinar. You remember that slide where I showed our events for this year so that we can plan for next year. So I think you have, you know how to contact us. You can just reply to the email from which you got the invite. In case you have any suggestions for future webinars, let us know. And we will work on including them next year. And if there are no more questions, that I would once more like to thank both to Agustina and to Mariam for their presentations, and also to Florencia working in the background and making us hear each other and being able to present. That's very much appreciated. So thank you very much for that. And without further ado, I wish you a nice remainder of the day or evening or morning, wherever you are. Thank you for coming, and we hope to see you all again in early August for the EQCAN presentation. Have a nice summer or winter or wherever you are. Thank you. Bye-bye. Ma salama, Mariam.
Salama.